Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are talking about the speech of Allah Jalla wa Ala, and in particular the Quran. And we read the text where the Shaykh says, لَيْسَ بِمَخْلُوقٍ كَكَلَامِ الْبَرِيَّةِ. It is not created, meaning the Quran is not created as in the same way the speech of the creation is created. So for example, the speech of mankind, as you are listening to right now, is a creation of Allah. So the Shaykh is telling us that the speech is not a creation of Allah, rather it is a description or an attribute of Allah. And just as Allah is not created, so His attributes also are not created. The attributes follow the essence. So a human being is created, so his attributes follow his essence, hence his attributes are also created. Let's take some talking points. This idea that the speech of Allah is His creation, where did this idea arise from? Because of a surety, the Sahaba did not speak about these matters. Well, the first person to speak about this matter of the speech of Allah being a creation of Allah was a man by the name of Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. He met his demise at the hands of Khalid al-Qusari, who killed him on the day of Eid, just like you sacrifice an animal. Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham would say things like Allah did not take Ibrahim a.s. as a Khalil, as a close beloved one, and He did not speak to Musa a literal speaking. These ideas were taken by another man called Jahm ibn Safwan, and this is where the word Jahmiyyah comes from. These are the people who follow the opinions of Jahm ibn Safwan, who in turn took them from Al-Ja'ad ibn Dirham. Now the fitna of Jahm ibn Safwan came about because he would debate with people of misguidance. And so he would debate with people who denied the existence of Allah Jalla wa Ala. They came to him and asked him, give us evidence that Allah exists, that there is such a thing as the Rabbul Alameen. Because according to these types of people and many other philosophers, this universe has just existed eternally in the past. It didn't have a creator. It did not newly come into existence. And so he thought about this and he said, yes, I have found an evidence that will prove that this universe has a creator. Now the argument he came up with is as follows. He said that the physical bodies that we see around us in this universe, they all have characteristics, in that you cannot have a particular body without characteristics. Some bodies, human or otherwise, so for example, a man is a body, a woman is a body, a house is a body, a chair is a body, and anything in this physical world, in the physical existence, is a body, a jism. And you can't have a body without characteristics. Some bodies are long, some are short, some are fat, some are thin, some are hot, some are cold. These are all descriptions and attributes of a particular body. These attributes cannot exist by themselves. So you cannot have long without there being something which is long. Otherwise, long by itself simply doesn't exist. It's senseless, meaningless. Likewise with all these characteristics, hot and cold. How can you have hot without there being something which is hot? So you see, all these characteristics cannot exist by themselves. They need a body by which to exist. And likewise, you cannot have a body which exists without characteristics. How can you have a jism, a body, which doesn't have any characteristics? Well, that's impossible. This means to say that every single body in our physical existence is needy of particular characteristics, without which it cannot exist. So that is to say, every body or every jism, living or otherwise, needs or is needy of characteristics. Characteristics such as long and short and hot and cold, or other things like movement. That's also a characteristic which many bodies are in need of, and that their existence would not be possible without it. Now these characteristics happen to these bodies without their choice. These bodies don't particularly choose their characteristics. So if it is known that these bodies are in need of characteristics because you cannot have a body without characteristics, it means that these bodies are needy. And this shows us that these bodies are created. Not just created, but created in a unique way, because each body has its unique characteristics which distinguishes it from other bodies. So not only they are created, but they are uniquely created. So therefore, if we appreciate then that these bodies are needy to something else, then there needs to be something else who's going to give these bodies these characteristics and create these bodies, and that these bodies do not exist simply by themselves, because they are needy of their characteristics in order to exist. So these characteristics are created. Now the people to whom he answered, they said, yes, okay, that makes sense, that a body cannot exist just by itself without any characteristics. It is needy of characteristics, and that which is needy is created, because it just cannot exist by itself. And so that which is needy needs to be created, as it does not exist simply in and of itself. So he was content with this argument which he formulated. His listeners were also content with this argument which he formulated. But then they asked him a question, okay, describe to us this Rabb, this creator. Now here's where things get interesting, because you need to make sure that the argument you formulate cannot be used against you. So it's like throwing a boomerang. You could throw it and certainly hit your enemies with it, but if it returns back to you, it will hit you as well. Now Jahm ibn Safwan, to this second question, thought about the Quran and the Sunnah, and he realized that in the Quran and the Sunnah there are many attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. For example, His anger, His mercy, love, revenge, and so on. Now, if he used these attributes to describe Allah Jalla wa Ala, then his argument will be used against him. That is to say that Allah is needy of these characteristics. So that makes Allah into just another body. Hence Allah would himself be a creation of someone else. But of course, we know that Allah Jalla wa Ala is not created. So how do we get around this? So he knew that he was in a tricky situation. If he affirms the attributes, he's also going to have to affirm that Allah is a body. And if that is the case, he's going to have to be consistent with his argument and say that Allah is needy and henceforth a creation. So to get around this, he started to say that Allah has none of the characteristics which he describes himself with in the Quran, and namely that he does not speak, because speech is a characteristic, of course. So he denied all of the attributes of Allah which Allah affirms in the Quran. Even the names of Allah, he did not affirm these names. Rather, he interpreted the names of Allah as the effects of that particular name, the effects being created. So if we say that Allah is Ar-Rahman, the Merciful, he says, no, this is not a name of Allah, but the Ar-Rahman, the Merciful, means the mercy which Allah creates and the effects of this mercy. This is what Ar-Rahman refers to. It does not refer to Allah himself, meaning his essence. He is not Ar-Rahman. So he basically said that all of the characteristics of Allah are to be rejected, except the characteristic of existence, that Allah simply exists, that's it. And it was this particular batil argument that caused such a fiasco, even up to this day, with people rejecting the attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So after Jahm ibn Safwan came along the Mu'tazila, they said, yes, we agree with this argument, and we will deny every attribute of Allah except certain attributes which can be affirmed intellectually. Then along came the madhab of the Ash'ari. They said, yes, what the Mu'tazila say is true, and yes, there are certain characteristics which can be affirmed intellectually, that Allah must have these characteristics. And these are 7 famous characteristics which they do affirm, and they reject everything else. The Mu'tazila affirm characteristics less than the ones that the Ash'ari affirm. After them came the madhab of the Al-Maturidiyah, and they affirmed 8 characteristics. Again, all going by their intellects and rationality, trying to philosophize these attributes of Allah Jalla wa Ala. So we can see that the root of this immense fiasco, the fiasco which has survived to this day and age, the root of all of that was this simple little argument that Jahm ibn Safwan formulated. It's a batil argument, but it produced immense fitna. The problem is when you try to rationalize something from the unseen. If someone knocks on your door, you have not seen him, so you have no right to describe him or rationalize his description. The only thing you can say about him is that which he has revealed about himself. Unless, of course, you open the door and see him, in which case you can talk about his characteristics. But if you have not seen him, then you're going to have to restrict yourself on what he has informed you of. And this is just an example of a person knocking on your door. and you have not opened the door, and your door will assume is non-transparent. So with Allah Jalla wa Ala, we cannot try to use our own minds to understand Him. We must restrict ourselves to the text. Yes, rationality is wonderful. It sets humans apart from the rest, but we must not use our rationality to tread on uncharted waters. Yes, it is true, we can know Allah Jalla wa Ala rationally, meaning to say His existence, but we cannot know too much more than that using our rationality. As far as the detailed description of Allah Jalla wa Ala goes, we're going to have to restrict ourselves to the text. And let it be known that it was the speech of Allah, the kalam, which was one of the first attributes to be rejected by Al-Ja'd ibn Dirham and also Jaham ibn Safwan, who inherited the knowledge from Al-Ja'd. The second talking point about the kalam of Allah, the speech of Allah, the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah say, just as we have read in the text of Tahaawiyyah, that the Quran is the speech of Allah, which the Prophet ﷺ heard from Jibreel, who of course heard it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet then regurgitated these ayat to his companions, and that is what we recite up to this day. We also say that the speech of Allah is heard, so Jibreel heard Allah Jalla wa Ala with a voice, just as Musa alayhi salam heard the voice of Allah speaking to him. What about the madhab of the Jahmiyyah? Well, as you have heard, they say that Allah cannot be described with speech in the very first place, and He is not someone who speaks. So what is the speech of Allah then, which the Quran refers to? Well, they say His speech is simply His creation, which is not part of Him, it's not His attribute, it is something that He has created. Hence, the Quran is created. And then we have the madhab of the Mu'tazila. It is similar to the Jahmiyyah. They also say that the Quran is a creation of Allah, which Allah created in Jibreel. And Jibreel expressed this speech to the Prophet. As for Musa alayhi salam, then the speech of Allah was created in the tree, which is what Musa alayhi salam heard. As for the speech which the Prophet heard, then that was created in Jibreel, which Jibreel then recited to the Prophet. We have the madhab also of the Kullabiyyah. They are followers of Ibn Kullab, and that is essentially the madhab of the Ash'ari. They say that the speech of Allah is the knowledge of Allah in Him. And this knowledge, to express it, Allah creates words and a voice. And this is what Jibreel heard. He heard a created voice and words which are used to express the knowledge of Allah in him. This is the Ash'ari madhab, and that's of the Kullabiyyah. And this knowledge of Allah could be expressed in Arabic, which would be the Quran. It might be expressed in Aramaic, which then would be the Injil, or perhaps Hebrew, which then would be the Torah, and so on. And besides these, there are other madhahib which have other opinions on this mas'ala, or this issue of the kalam of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Okay, so if that's the case, then what are the evidences which the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah have to believe in what they believe? First of all, the Quran is the speech of Allah, and the evidence for this in Surah At-Tawbah, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ. And if anyone from the mushrikeen seeks your protection, then give him this protection so that he may hear the speech of Allah, which of course is the Quran. As for the belief that it began with Allah, then Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah Fussilat, لَا يَأْتِيهِ الْبَاطِلُ مِنْ بَيْنِ يَدَيْهِ وَلَا مِنْ خَلْفِهِ تَنْزِيلٌ مِنْ حَكِيمٍ حَمِيدٍ. Falsehood cannot approach it from the front nor behind. It is a revelation from the Hakim Hamid. So the key word is from. So it began from Allah. So what about this issue of the bodies needing an attribute, and they cannot exist without an attribute? Because this is the root of it all. This is what has caused all of these people to say that Allah does not speak. Well, about this argument, because this is the root, this is what we need to look at. Everything else branches from this. So let us deal with the root. So we say this argument that if Allah speaks, it means that's His attribute, which means He's a body, which means He's in need of attributes, and anything which is needy is a creation. And of course we are not allowed to say that Allah is a body. We say that if Allah speaks, then this attribute of speech happened with His will, His mashi'ah. Now their argument was that these attributes which happen to a particular body happen without the body choosing it. But this argument would not apply to speech, because Allah speaks when He chooses to speak. So from that angle, their own argument would not apply to the characteristic of speech, such that they could ever deny it. Just remember what they said, that these attributes which happen upon a body, happen upon it without the body choosing it. That's what we mentioned from them previously, if you remember. The second point is that for them to say that Allah does not speak directly contradicts what is clear-cut in the Quran. Many ayat talk about the Quran being the kalam of Allah. As we mentioned the ayah of Surah At-Tawbah, for example, before. Also when Allah says, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا, and Allah spoke to Musa taklima, a real speech, a speaking. Likewise, وَلَمَّا جَاءَ مُوسَى لِمِيقَاتِنَا وَكَلَّمَهُ رَبُّهُ, when Musa came to our appointed place and his Rabb spoke to him. Likewise, تِلْكَ الرُّسُلُ فَضَّلْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ مِنْهُمْ مَنْ كَلَّمَ اللَّهُ, those messengers we preferred some over others, from them are those whom Allah spoke to. Now obviously you can anticipate that the Mu'tazila are going to try to reinterpret these ayat. However, the general rule is that we must carry the words on their apparent meaning, because Allah Jalla wa'ala is the most knowledgeable, He is the most eloquent at expressing Himself, He is the most trustworthy, or a sincere well-wisher to us, and He is the most truthful. These are four characteristics. When they are combined in any one person, then His words are to be taken on their apparent meaning, without interpreting them otherwise, unless you have evidence from that same person himself. And then also we find that the Sahaba did not interpret these ayat in any way other than the apparent meaning. As for the Ash'ari, ultimately they also say the Quran is created, but they say that the speech of Allah is simply the knowledge of Allah in Him, which He created in Jibreel, and then Jibreel expressed this knowledge in the form of his speech, which the Prophet heard. So the upshot of this is that the Quran is also created, only they try to tone it down a bit. They say that the speech of Allah is not a creation, but then neither is it words and sound which are heard. Rather it is a meaning or a knowledge within Allah. But of course the problem with that is the word kalam in the Arabic language, and we need to look at the Arabic language here, does not mean simply knowledge inside you. The word kalam in the Arabic language means speech, which is voice which is heard. So it needs to be audible. If it's not audible, it is not kalam. And remember what we said, that the root letters kalama, however you arrange them, meaning in whatever combination you arrange them, they make a verb which has a hard meaning to it, not a soft meaning. And if we say speech is just a meaning inside you or some knowledge inside you, then this is a soft meaning, it's not a hard meaning. The hard meaning would be that which is words and a sound that can be heard. So those who say that the kalam of Allah is just a meaning, then they say that this meaning existed with Allah eternally past, and then whenever Allah wanted to convey the message to the Prophet, He threw this knowledge in Jibreel, who in turn spoke this knowledge, or you can say expressed this knowledge in terms of words to the Prophet. And this is what we are reciting in the Quran right now. It's an expression of the knowledge of Allah. And so this is the way they understand kalam, the speech of Allah. There is a problem if we say that this speech is the eternal knowledge of Allah Jalla wa Ala, which is just expressed in the form of words. And this problem is something which one of the Ash'ari, Al-Amidi, pointed out himself. He said that if this is knowledge with Allah eternally in the past, the problem is we find in the Quran expressions which refer to the past, as for example, قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا. Allah has heard the speech of the one, meaning the woman, who argues with you, O Prophet, about her husband. Now Al-Amidi asked, if this is knowledge with Allah eternally past, then whom was Allah listening to? Because there was no human being eternally in the past, such that a man and a wife could be arguing and the woman could be arguing about her husband. But Allah refers to the past. He says Allah has heard the speech of the woman who argues with you about her husband. So he asks the question, what exactly did Allah hear? And likewise we could say the same thing about every past tense verb in the Quran. So this objection that Al-Amidi has raised, Al-Amidi being from the Ash'ari himself, is a rational objection to the claim that the Quran is not a verbal speech, but rather the speech of Allah is just His knowledge eternally in the past. So let's just sum it all up then. The rebuttal against the deviant sects with regards to the kalam of Allah is firstly to say that the kalam in the language means that there must be a voice which is heard. This is the asl. Anyone departing from this asl needs to bring us evidence. So that's the first point. We come in from the linguistic angle. The second is that we use the idea when Allah links something to Himself, then this could be of two types. Either it's an object which can exist by itself independently, for example, Naqatullah, the she-camel of Allah, that's just an independent particular object that can exist by itself. And so when Allah links that to Himself, it is by means of honoring. So it is honoring that particular camel. Whereas if something cannot exist by itself and needs something else in order to exist, such as speech, you can't just have speech by itself. Somebody needs to speak that speech for it to exist, obviously. So such a thing then, if Allah links that to Himself, it is His attribute. Remember when we spoke about attributes, the attribute, for example, long or short. How can long exist by itself? Something needs to be long for the concept of length to exist. And then the third way is what we have just mentioned. It was the problem raised by Al-Amidi that the Quran uses the perfect tense in the verbs. Now how can that be if the speech of Allah is His past eternal knowledge? So in the case of قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ قَوْلَ الَّتِي تُجَادِلُكَ فِي زَوْجِهَا, this only makes sense if Allah first heard her speech and then Allah spoke these words, informing the Prophet that Allah has heard the statement of this woman. But of course that can only happen after she has spoken. And as we read before, the Shaykh al-Tahaawiyyah says that anyone who listens to this Quran and then claims that this is the speech of man, then he has made kufr. As Allah says about such a person, سَأُصْلِيهِ سَقَرْ, I will make him enter the Saqar, which is a name for the fire. And this is in response to the one who says, إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا قَوْلُ الْبَشَرِ, verily, this is only the speech of man. That's in Surah Al-Muddathir, ayah 25. And that is clear to see. You can inspect and study the speech of man, and then you can study the Quran, and the difference will be all too clear. That the Quran does not resemble the speech of man. And so from here we also say that no one could have taught him the Quran either. The Mushrikun did claim this, as in Surah Al-Nahl, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ إِنَّمَا يُعَلِّمُهُ بَشَرٌ لِسَانُ الَّذِي يُلْحِدُونَ إِلَيْهِ أَعْجَمِيٌّ وَهَذَا لِسَانٌ عَرَبِيٌّ مُبِينٌ. We know that they say that another man has taught him this Quran, but the tongue which they are referring to is non-Arab. But this is the plain Arabic language. So anyone who says that the Prophet learnt the Quran from someone else, or he came up with it himself, or perhaps these scientific references you find in the Quran, they might say, well, he took it from other people. All of this implies one thing, that the Quran is man-made. It is the speech of man. And so the rebuttal against all of this is that there is a clear difference between the Quran and the speech of mankind. As long as we are sure that the Quran is not the speech of man, and henceforth has to be the speech of Allah, then any scientific references in the Quran also cannot have been taken from anyone else. So those who disbelieved in the Quran, some of them said that this is just soothsaying, others said this is poetry, some others said that this is the speech of man, and some others said that this is just fables of the men of old, as they say, the asatirul awwaleen. And all of these claims have one purpose behind them, to make other people averse to the Quran. And this idea is perfectly illustrated in the narration where Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, one of the chiefs, came to the Prophet to try to negotiate with the Prophet to leave the Quran. He said to the Prophet, "O Muhammad, if you want the dominion, then we will make you the king. If you want wealth, we will give you all the wealth you want. And if you want women, we will give you the most beautiful women." And to this, the Prophet ﷺ told him to listen, and he recited Surah Fussilat, Hamim, تنزيل من الرحمن الرحيم كتاب فصلت آياته قرآنا عربيا لقوم يعلمون بشيرا ونذيرا فأعرض أكثرهم فهم لا يسمعون. Up until he reached the ayah فإن أعرضوا فقل أنذرتكم صاعقة مثل صاعقة عاد وثمود. If they turn away, then tell them, I have warned you of a striking just like the striking of Ad and Thamud. Upon this then, the representative said, that is enough, and he returned back to his people. And as he went back to his people noticed that the expression on his face had changed. They asked him, what have you brought? Utbah ibn Rabi'ah said, I have heard a discourse like I've never heard before. He said, by Allah, this is not poetry, nor is it spells or witchcraft. Take my advice and leave this man alone. He said, by Allah, something more astonishing is about to happen than what I have heard. Now if the Arab kill this man, your task will be accomplished by others, but if he brings the Arabs under his control, then his kingdom will be your kingdom, and his honor will be your honor, and he will prove to be fortunate for you. And so the people thought that Utbah ibn Rabi'ah has been bewitched by this Qur'an. But the point from this story is that Utbah ibn Rabi'ah immediately realized that this is no ordinary speech. And so this brings us on to an important matter to discuss, which is the miraculous nature of the Qur'an. First of all, the word miracle, in the Arabic it is called al-i'jaz. The Qur'an does not describe itself with this word, miracle. Rather, the word which has been used is ayah, sign. Also, the word burhan is used in the Qur'an. As for the word i'jaz, then some of the ulama have used this because i'jaz means to render someone incapable. And this is because the Qur'an, with its challenge, renders the people incapable. Incapable of what? Incapable of producing something similar to it. The basic evidence of this in Surah Al-Isra, ayah 88, قُلْ لَإِنِ اجْتَمَعَتِ الْإِنسُ وَالْجِنُّ عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَأْتُوا بِمِثْلِ هَذَا الْقُرْآنِ لَا يَأْتُونَ بِمِثْلِهِ وَلَوْ كَانَ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ ظَهِيرًا. So this ayah tells us that even if the jinn and mankind were to help each other to bring the likes of this Qur'an, they would not be able to do so. Likewise in Surah Hud, قُلْ فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ مِثْلِهِ مُفْتَرَيَاتٍ وَادْعُوا مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Say, bring 10 chapters similar to it, which are forged from you, and call upon whoever can help you besides Allah if you are truthful. فَإِن لَّمْ يَسْتَجِيبُوا لَكُمْ فَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا أُنزِلَ بِعِلْمِ اللَّهِ وَأَن لَّا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ فَهَلْ أَنتُم مُّسْلِمُونَ. If they cannot answer you, then you should know that this has been revealed with the knowledge of Allah, and that there is no deity worthy of worship except He, so will you then not become Muslims? Okay, so if it is established that mankind and jinnkind cannot produce the like thereof, then the next question we ask is the reason for this because Allah Jalla wa Ala has taken the ability away from them, so He has stripped them of this ability? Meaning to say that man does indeed have the ability to produce the like of the Qur'an, but it's just that Allah has stripped away his ability to do so. For example, a man might be strong enough to lift a particular stone, but if Allah intervenes and strips away his ability to lift this stone, then this man would not be able to lift the stone. Whereas otherwise we know mankind can lift up a stone, and we're just talking about a light stone here. Now this opinion has been mentioned, but what is correct about this is that man from the very beginning, from his own nature, does not have the ability to produce the like of the Qur'an, the reason being that he cannot compete with the speech of a divine being, where man himself is non-divine, and clearly there is no comparison. And even from the first instance of revelation, where it was revealed to him, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. When these ayats were revealed, of course the Prophet was shaking, because this type of speech does not resemble any other speech. So with regards to the miracle of the Qur'an, there are a few opinions. The Mu'tazila and others, they say that man is capable of reproducing the like thereof, but it's just that Allah has stripped him of this ability. The rebuttal against this opinion is from Surah Al-Isra, ayah 88, which we have just quoted. The ayah effectively tells us that both jinn and mankind have much ability, but despite their impressive ability, they will not be able to match the Quran. Yet what is interesting is that the Mu'tazila use this very ayah to propagate their opinion, that man does have the ability to produce the like thereof, but Allah has stripped man of this ability. And so this is where the actual miracle lies, man being stripped of this ability. So the second way to refute them would be to say that if we say that Allah has stripped them of this ability to reproduce the like of the Quran, then we say the miracle is coming from Allah, not from the Quran. But that's not correct. Rather, the miracle does not lie in Allah, the miracle lies in the Quran itself, which would mean that man, by his nature, has not the ability to produce or to compete with the Quran. So it is the Quran rendering man incapable, not Allah Himself. This is why it's called the miracle of the Quran. It is not called the miracle of Allah. And everyone agrees to this. So you see the difference then. If we adopt the opinion of some of these people who say that Allah has only restricted mankind from producing the like of the Quran, then the miracle would not be from the Quran itself. It will be from an external source, meaning to say a source external to the Quran, and not the Quran itself. Now this nature of the Quran is that in its words it uses, it has the highest form of eloquence, such that if you were to investigate all of the speech of the Arab in terms of their writing, be it the prose text, poetry, newspapers, even their verbal speech, so basically you inspect the whole of the Arabic language spoken by man, even the most eloquent of them, they will always have some parts of their speech which would be lowly in terms of eloquence. So it would not be as eloquent as can be. So this second opinion says that the miracle lies in the actual wording of the Quran. However, this statement or opinion is deficient because when Allah Jalla wa Ala challenges mankind and jinnkind to produce the like of the Quran, then it is in terms of words and meaning. Because that's how the language is, it's words and meaning. So that was the second opinion. Just to recap then, the first opinion was to say that man can produce the likes of the Quran, but it's just that Allah has prevented man from doing so. And the second opinion is that the miracle does lie in the Quran, as opposed to an external factor, which is what opinion 1 says. But this opinion 2 says that the miracle lies in the words of the Quran, the alfaz of the Quran. And we say no, it lies in both the alfaz and the ma'ani, the meaning. And we have the third opinion, which says that the miraculous nature of the Quran lies specifically in the meaning. And really this is just taking the other side of opinion 2, because opinion 2 focuses on the words, and now this opinion 3 is focusing on the meaning. And so both of these opinions then are deficient. And then we have the fourth opinion, in answering the question, where does the actual miracle lie? So this fourth opinion says that the miracle lies in the nazm, and this is how you compose your words and the corresponding meaning which is contained in these composition of words, obeying the rules of the grammar and giving consideration to how the words and the meaning are linked. So this opinion is taking a look at the Quran purely from a linguistic standpoint of view, purely from a balagha standpoint of view, the eloquence in which you speak a few words but say much, as opposed to people who speak rubbish. They speak much but say very little. The fifth opinion, it says that the miracle of the Quran lies in everything which is contained in the Quran. Well then, what is contained in the Quran? Well, quite a few things. First of all, matters of the unseen that no man can possibly know about, be it matters about Allah, about the angels, or news of the past, and news of the future. What else does it contain? It contains orders and prohibitions, where these orders and prohibitions are not possible to come from this Prophet. Also, its general guidance that it speaks of, when you take a look at it, it does not have the footprints of man. However, the problem faced with this opinion is that when the Quran challenges the Arab, the only distinguishing factor between the Arab and the non-Arab would be the eloquence in the language. Otherwise, these points which we have just mentioned, they're not restricted to the Arabic language. So when the Quran, for example, talks about matters of the unseen, then this is not specific to the Arabic language. whereas the balagha, the eloquence of the Arabic language, is clearly restricted and specific to the Arabic language. And then we know that the Arab in those days did not have knowledge of history, such that they could produce similar stories to that in the Quran. So the challenge therefore would be unfair. So if you're going to challenge someone, you need to make it a fair challenge that they have a chance of winning. And the only challenge we can see there would have to be the Arabic language. Otherwise, these Arab did not know anything else besides that. And the sixth opinion, amongst many opinions, says that the Quran is a miracle because it is the speech of Allah. And because of this, it is impossible for man to copy it. And this is the opinion that Tahaawiyyah mentions in his text which we have just read. It's like when you see a person from the Arab, you look at him and you say that he is from the Arab. Another person from Europe, you look at him and you say, yes, he's European. Another person, you look at him and you say, yes, he's Asian. Now, how do you know these things? Well, you have not studied these people in great detail, but they have the general features of a European or an Asian or an Arab. You can tell by their general features. So the point is, you don't need to study this person's eyes or nose and his ears and his lips and so on in great detail. Just the general look about him will give the game away, that he is from Asia, that he is from Europe. We're just talking about general features without actually going into the details of the anatomy. And so that is talking about appearances. Let us now talk about speech. Again, we can tell what type of speech belongs to what type of people. When we look at the early Muslims, their type of speech would be few in words, but much in meaning and fa'idah and benefit. So they would speak little but say much, as opposed to many others who speak much but say very little. And this is what Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali said. He said that the kalam, the speech of the Salaf, the early Muslims, was few or little but of much benefit, and the kalam, the speech of the Khalaf, those who came afterwards, was much but of little benefit. So completely the opposite. And we can easily, for example, tell the speech of the politicians. It's exactly like that. They speak so much but say very little. So you can easily tell the politician's type of speech. Those people familiar with the hadith can easily tell whether this particular speech is likely to come from the Prophet or not. The general style gives it away. And just look to your own family members. You know what type of speech your family members would make. So if somebody tells you, your mother said such and such, it might feel strange to you. You might feel, no, she would never say something like that. Why do you say that? Well, you say that because you know the type of speech your mother normally makes. And when you hear this particular quote given to you by someone, it does not match her normal type of speech. If you are familiar with the scholars of Islam, then you know that the different scholars have different styles of speech. Al-Imam Ahmad has a different style to Ibn Taymiyyah, who has a different style to Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who has a different style to An-Nawawi, and so on. The point we are making is that speech, just like your looks, have general appearances. If that is understood, then this is what At-Tahaawiyyah in this book of his is telling us, that the kalam of Allah does not resemble the kalam of bashar, of mankind. The African man does not resemble the Chinese man, and that the difference is clear-cut. If that difference is clear-cut, and the difference in their speech style is clear-cut, then how much more vivid is the difference between the speech of man and the speech of his creator. And so if all of that is understood, then we realize why the Arab, during the time of the Prophet, who had reached the apex of eloquence, could not compete with the Quran, simply because the speech of Allah does not resemble the speech of any man. So it was simply way out of their league. Let us ask another question. What are some of the distinguishing features of the Quran? Well, let us make mention of some of these. The Quran has specific language styles taken from the different tribes. So it has language style taken from the Quraysh, others taken from the tribe of Hudayl, others taken from the tribe of Tamim, others from Hawazin, others from the people of Yemen. Many different types of languages you will find in the Quran, For example, when Allah says in Surah An-Najm, وَأَنْتُمْ سَامِدُونَ, and you are Samidun, Ibn Abbas said that as-sumud means singing in the language of the Himyar tribe. There are words in the Quran which some of the people of Quraysh did not know. For example, when Umar ibn al-Khattab was giving the khutbah, he recited the ayah of Surah An-Nahl, أَوْ يَأْخُذَهُمْ عَلَى تَخَوُّفٍ فَإِنَّ رَبَّكُمْ لَرَؤُوفٌ رَحِيمٌ. He asked the question, what does at-takhawwuf mean? And so the congregation kept quiet. So a man from the tribe of Hudayl stood up and he said, O Amirul Mu'mineen, at-takhawwuf in our language, meaning in the language of our tribe, it means at-tanaqqus. And he recited a line of poetry from one of the poets of the tribe of Hudayl to prove his point. So tanaqqus means to decrease. If that is the case, then this ayah would mean, or that he may seize them with gradually decreasing what they have. For verily your Rabb is full of kindness and merciful. Now this question from Umar was not a test. He genuinely did not know what that word meant, simply because this word is known in the tribe of Hudayl, and Umar radiallahu an was Qurashi, from the tribe of Quraysh. He was not familiar with this word. Point being that the Quran takes from the different tribes. It must be coming from one who knows all the language of all the tribes, someone who encompasses the Arabic language, and only Allah Jalla wa Ala encompasses the Arabic language. So what we are saying is that this is a defining feature of the Quran. No man can encompass the language of all the tribes, but the Quran takes from all the tribes. It comes from the one who encompasses the Arabic language. That is the words. What about the grammar? Again, it takes grammar from the different tribes as well. And the second defining feature, the words themselves, they are the peak of eloquence. Even the letters like Alif Lam Mim at the beginning of the surah. And so none of the Arab were able to find defect in the Quran with regards to the eloquence of the wording. And then thirdly, the meaning. When it comes to the meaning of the speech of man, then definitely from time to time you will find some deficiency. Yet we find the Quran speaks about a whole variety of topics, and it maintains its supreme standard in terms of the meaning of the words it uses. And then after that, as we have mentioned before, the nazm, the arrangement of the words and the corresponding meaning. So the eloquence comes from the arrangement of the words, the meaning, and the connection between the words and meaning. So that is another in our list of defining features of the Quran. The next one is the authority that the Quran imposes on the soul. And this is simply just something that is felt. You could hear orders and prohibitions from people, but when they order you and prohibit you using the Quran, quoting from the ayat of the Quran, it has a different effect on you. There is something about the Quran that imposes itself on you. And one of the secrets of its imposition is that the Quran comes with various topics which it speaks about in succession. So for example, you could have ayat of the Quran addressing the munafiqeen, some others addressing the mu'mineen, some others addressing the soul, others have aqidah in them, others have stories of the past, others have predictions for the future, some ayat have a warning, some have glad tiding, some have descriptions of Jannah, others descriptions of the fire, others are laws and regulations. Then it might go into talking about the creation of man, Adam alayhi salam, and so on. It's all varied. But the human soul itself is varied. It is a complex thing. Of course, we don't fully understand it, we cannot see it, feel it, touch it, but we know it's a complex thing. Sometimes the soul needs warning, sometimes it needs encouragement, sometimes it needs something to make it feel happy or elated. It needs all sorts of different things, which the Quran brings. These are words in the Quran which really do address the human soul. Let us take some review questions. Question number 1. The great Ash'ari scholar Al-Amidi, known for his argumentation and intelligence, essentially refuted the Ash'ari madhab. Unwittingly, explain how he did this. Question number 2. The Quran has been called a miracle by some of the scholars coming after the early generations. We mentioned 6 opinions in where this miracle lies. Recall the 6 opinions. making mention of the opinion that Tahaawiyyah favors. Question 3. We mentioned 5 distinguishing characteristics of the Quran. Recall them.